Hello everyone, welcome to our new video in the Vision Transformer series. Continuing our journey, in this video we are going to cover Vision Transformers or ViT. In the last two videos, we covered several algorithms that were trying to leverage attention into the image domain. And we saw that some of those methods were trying to augment convolutional neural networks with the attention mechanism, and as well as some other methods that build fully attentional model. While these papers were effectively leveraging attention for image processing, but they did not consider all the factors that make transformers very powerful. So in order to understand the merits of ViT, we first need to discuss this question, that is, what makes transformers very powerful? You might have heard about the emerging properties of transformers. What factors make such emerging properties? Obviously, the first answer is the attention mechanism, which helps in modeling long-range dependencies. But besides that, there are these two other factors. The scalability of transformers for pre-training on very large datasets, which makes them suitable for transfer learning. So that, with that, we can pre-train them on large datasets and then fine-tune them for some smaller downstream tasks. And lastly, transformers have been very effective for self-supervised learning, which allows us to leverage unlabeled data. To understand the importance of this, typically we have limited amount of training data for most applications, but there are massive amount of unlabeled data. So self-supervised learning is useful to leverage unlabeled data for pre-training. Now let's start with an overview of ViT. Given an input image, ViT makes a sequence of image patches by splitting that image into some patches, and then it applies the standard transformers to the sequence. Before we dig more into the details of ViT, let's first talk about the design objectives of ViT, which is we want to have minimal inductive bias. That means we want to avoid relying on the 2D structure of images, and instead ViT tries to learn everything from scratch. So now let's see ViT in a step-by-step. We are given this input image X with size h times w times c for height, width, and number of channels. And one example of such image is shown here. So in the very first step, we split this image into the patches of fixed size, p by p. And as a result, we get the sequence denoted as x sub p with size n times p squared c. And n here is the number of patches, that is the size of the original image, h times w, divided by the size of the patch, which is p squared. And this is also called the effective sequence length. So now that we have got our sequence, in the next step, we flatten each patch and apply a linear projection. So as an example, with this patch I, we flatten it and then we get a vector of size p squared times c. Then for linear projection, we multiply that vector with this matrix W that has size p squared c times d model. And this d model is basically the hidden representation dimension of the transformer. As a result of this operation on this patch I, we get this vector of size d model. Sometimes we use d or d model in this video. We can apply this linear projection on the entire sequence using matrix-matrix multiplication, and as a result, we get this output of size n by d. In the next step, we append the resulting projected matrix with a new class embedding vector of size d, and we'll talk about the role of this vector later, but for now, we have this new matrix of size n plus 1 by d. We then add the position embeddings of the same size from position 0 to position n, and on the right we get this matrix Z, which is the input to the transformer. Now we feed this matrix Z to the transformer encoder and extract the representations from the final layer. We then feed this representation to the classification head, which is shown as MLP, that has two linear layers. And finally, we get this vector of class probabilities as output. Here, this illustration is adapted from the ViT paper that shows the entire process we described in one figure. Given this example image, we break it into a sequence of patches, then we flatten each element of the sequence and apply linear projection. Then we append the class embedding at position 0 and also add the position embeddings to the projected sequence. And this forms the input to the transformer. After going through the transformer, we extract the final representations and send them to the MLP head for classification. On the right, you see the architecture of the transformer encoder that receives the embedded patches as input. The transformer encoder contains this repeating block that is repeated L times. Each block is composed of two subnetworks. One is this pre-layer norm multi-head attention subnetwork on the bottom, and on top is the feed-forward subnetwork that is shown with MLP. Each subnetwork is also enclosed within their own residual block. There are three main variants of ViT with different number of layers: ViT base, ViT large, and ViT huge, with 12, 24, and 32 layers respectively. And note that when you see a notation like, for example, ViT B-/16, that refers to ViT base with a 16 by 16 patch size. Now, for training ViT, remember that the design objective was to have minimal inductive bias and instead learning everything from scratch. Because we have to learn everything from scratch, that means we need lots of training data. Therefore, the authors proposed to pre-train the ViT models on a very large dataset like JFT 300 million and using self-supervised learning paradigm, and then fine-tune them on smaller downstream tasks. And for fine-tuning, they discard the MLP head from the pre-trained model and replace that with a newly initialized linear layer. They also note that it's more effective to pre-train at low resolution and then fine-tune that at higher resolution. For example, you can pre-train your model at 224 by 224 and then fine-tune it at 384 by 384 resolution. But note that regarding the fine-tuning at higher resolution, the patch size must still stay the same because of that projection matrix. And as a result, increasing the resolution leads to higher number of patches. And that means there are some positions in the new sequence that we do not have any learned position embeddings for them. But the authors propose to use 2D interpolation to resolve this problem. And although we didn't want to rely on any inductive bias, but this is the only place that we use this 2D structure assumption. Now let's look at some results from the paper. This red box here highlights three ViT models that are pre-trained on either JFT dataset, like this first two, or the ImageNet dataset, shown here as I21K. Then we fine-tuned these models on these datasets that are shown in the left and compare the results with the ResNet-based models. As you can see, when ViT is pre-trained on JFT, it achieves a state-of-the-art in most evaluation datasets. But note that when ViT is pre-trained on a mid-sized dataset like the ImageNet, its performance is slightly lower than ResNet. So this brings us to the competition between inductive bias versus large-scale pre-training. When we have mid-sized dataset for pre-training, inductive bias plays an important role and therefore ResNet shows superior results. But when we do have sufficiently large training dataset, then large-scale training is superior to inductive bias. So far, the pre-training that we have described was all based on supervised learning. But the authors also had some preliminary experiments with self-supervised learning. This self-supervised learning is similar to masked language modeling like in BERT. So for pre-training, they randomly mask some of the image patches from the input and then they try to learn the masked patch. They explore these three different mask prediction strategies. In the first strategy, they only predict the mean pixel intensities of the patch in RGB. In the second strategy, they predict a 4x4 downsized version of the patch, and finally, in the third strategy, they predict the entire patch with L2. The pre-trained models with these self-supervision strategies was quite successful, although the last one, L2, was worse than the others. And that brings us to the end of this video. In this video, we covered ViT, which is a pivotal paper in computer vision that not only leverages attention, but also was able to make use of other important factors in transformers. That is, the scalability of pre-training on large-scale datasets, and then fine-tune them on smaller downstream tasks. Although most of the experiments in this paper were based on supervised learning for pre-training, but the authors also had some preliminary exploration of self-supervised learning. In future videos, we will cover more models that take this ViT into next level, such as CLEAP and Dino. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.